And to join your squares, just make sure your squares are facing the same side before you start joining them. You can choose which side you want to be the wrong side and which one is going to be the right side. It's very much up to you. Just make sure your squares are all facing the same side before start joining them. And to join them, actually I'm going to use the same yarn color I have used to make the last round, but it's very much up to you to use any yarn color of your choice. The reason I'm using the same yarn color is just because I want to make the perfect invisible joining. I'm going to join my squares using slip stitch, and I'm going to start in these back loops, or actually for the square that's facing me, I'm going to start in this loop that's facing the other side, which is actually the back loop. Just insert the hook, and remember, since in each corner there are 2 chains, actually you're going to start in those chain spaces. One of them, just chain 1 to fully attach your yarn, insert the hook back into that same stitch, grab your next square, and for the next square actually you're going to grab the loop that's facing you. So actually, which means you're going to use the loops that are facing each other for each square. Then you're going to join your squares using the slip stitch method. Just pull through the yarn like that. Now you have 2 loops on the hook. Now pull through this first loop through the first loop. That's slip stitch. Just do the same thing into the next chain like that. And remember, you're only grabbing 1 loop. Slip stitch like that. And that's just what you're going to do to join all your pieces together. So just continue slip stitching in each stitch all the way until the end. Do not skip any stitch. And remember to work only in 1 loop for each square. Actually, just try to work only in 1 loop at a time per square. And just remember, you're only working into these loops that are facing each other. So just go ahead until you are done, and this is how your work must start to look like this. This is going to be the inside of the cardigan, and this is going to be the outside of the cardigan, which means the outside of the cardigan, this is how it's going to look like. So this is the reason I'm using the same yarn color as the one I have used for the last round, actually just to create this perfect invisible joining. So just go ahead until you reach this part. I'm sure how I'm going to attach this next 2 squares to this first 2 squares. So once you reach this point, just continue actually doing the same thing that you have been doing throughout. Remember also to work into this chain 2 spaces like I said in the corners. Do not skip them. So once you are done joining your first 2 squares together, next you are going to attach your next 3rd and 4th square. And then actually just going to repeat the same thing. You have attached your first 2 squares together. Just try to look for this chain 2 spaces in the corners like this. Insert the hook in there, as well as into the first chain 2 in the other squares. In the other square, I mean. Just slip stitch like that into the next chain as well. Slip stitch. So just go ahead, do the same thing you have done for joining your first squares together until you have fully joined all your squares together. And this is just how your things are going to look like. Don't worry about this gap in between here, just looking like this because you haven't joined them this way. But you're going actually to fill up this space once you start joining your squares from the other side, actually from the other side going down like this. For now, just go ahead until you have joined all your squares together like these ones until you reach this point. Make sure at the end here you must also complete this last chain 2 spaces in these last corners as well. Then before you cut off the yarn, just chain 1 and you can cut off the yarn. It's actually just the same process you're going to do until you have fully joined all your squares together, depending on the panel that you are working on. In this case, I have just demonstrated how I'm going to join my squares, but I have used the sleeves. That's why I'm only having 3 squares. So just go ahead until you have fully joined your squares and before you cut off the yarn. So next, actually, I'm just going to show how you are going to join your squares across like this. But in this case, let me just show on the back panel that I've already done halfway. This is how the thing is looking like. So let me just show you how I'm going to join my squares across like this, having one side already joined. So now I'm just going to do the same process, joining them like this. Just start off by making a slip knot. Starting this chain to one of the chain in the corners. Chain on to fully attach the yarn. Insert the hook back into the same loop as well as into the first stitch for the next square, which is actually also the first one. Just slip stitch like that into the next loop as well. You are still working in the corner, slip stitch. So just go ahead, do the same thing in each stitch across all the way until the end. Like that. So just go ahead all the way until you reach this point. Once you reach this point, I'll come meet you here to come show how I'm going to do this part. So once you reach this point, actually just try to look for this chain spaces in here. You can just actually just slip stitch in one of the chain space, even one of them, at least just to avoid having so many spaces between. Now you have to move to the other side. Actually you have to move across this part that you have joined to this other side and look for one of these chain spaces in the corner here, just to fill up this space to avoid having so many spaces between your granny squares. So just go ahead, slip stitching in each stitch like usual all the way until the end, and actually just to repeat the same process until you have fully joined all your squares together. So just go ahead doing that, slip stitching all the way until the end here. Once you reach the end, just chain one, cut off the yarn. You can use these squares to make your blanket or cardigans or whatever project you would like to make.